Well, thank you so much to Alan Small and the other leaders of the party here for accommodating us. You know, originally I believe this OLP AGM was scheduled for November, and you know, we have 90 days to get these regional directors in place according to our party bylaws and constitution. And so our 90 days expires tomorrow, and we had to have our caucus meeting today, basically, and so it was very gracious of Alan and the party to accommodate us and move the date. Yesterday I was at the Generation Screwed was hosting me at Western University, and I was making the case. You know, I was explaining to them exactly how the government screws them, but I didn't want to leave them with a dour note. I didn't want to leave them feeling hopeless and screwed. There is hope, and we're going to talk about that. So I'm going to make the case today for pessimism, and also the case for optimism for the Libertarian Party and our and how we're doing. I'll tell you a little story that kind of highlights what it's like, at least from my perspective. As a firefighter, and many of you know that I'm a firefighter paramedic by trade, and I had a house fire, actually an apartment fire one time, and we responded there. I was the first in crew. We went into this apartment. The fire was confined to one apartment. We entered the apartment, and there was smoke, you know, down to about chest level, so we had to get low. And there was a lady, buck naked on the couch, laying there in this house fire. So I went up to this lady, and you know, I noticed that there were beer bottles all around her. There was Cheetos stuck in her rolls. There was evidence of her addiction to immediate gratification everywhere, from the cigarette stains on her fingers and her mouth. And as I leaned over, she grabbed me, pulled me in, and said, "Hey, honey." And obviously she wanted a little bit more than just to be rescued. So I said, "Listen, you know, we've got a fire. This place is on fire. We need to get out now." And then she realized she wasn't going to get what she wanted from me and said, "Screw you." Now, I did not, I violated her consent in that moment. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm sorry if I violated principles, but I grabbed that lady, I pulled her out of the fire, got her out into the hallway to safety, called up for an EMS crew, and they came and wrapped her in a blanket. And when I went back, before I went back in to put the fire out, I looked at her just to make sure she was all right. She looked up at me, screwed up her face, gave me the old Trudeau salute, said, "F you." So all those years of dedication to my craft, learning it, the sacrifice, the time spent exercising, getting my body ready to fight this emergency, you know, all those visions of watching Rescue 911 with William Shatner where the people I say are going to give me a barbecue and thank me and give me a hug, all culminated in that one moment there, that lady I just saved from a fire, looking up, giving me the Trudeau salute and saying, "F you." And ladies and gentlemen, I will put to you that this is what it's like being a libertarian activist in today's society, isn't it? We see the fire burning, and we see our victim there, addicted to immediate gratification, getting all the resources they can, and they're completely blind to this, and we are just trying to save them, and the thanks we get is, "Screw you guys." That's what it's like. So how do we deal with this then? How do we, you know, find I guess the strength to carry on? Why do we keep doing what we're doing? Are we gluttons for punishment? What is it about running into burning buildings and getting no thanks for it that keeps us going as libertarian activists? There is real reason to be pessimistic if you look around. I don't know if anyone's been watching the American election at all. Has anyone seen that? Apparently they're having an election down there. You know, there's a huge cultural war, it seems like, going on, right? There's more divisions occurring in society right now, and there are all these cultural factors. I mean, I went through the list with Generation Screwed. Here's the list of the ways, you know, I told the young people that the government's screwing them. We started with taxation. Then we went to the carbon tax. And the carbon tax, the problem with the carbon tax is not just that it's a tax. You know, the thing that has protected people, that has made the environment better for people, is industrialization, cheap, abundant energy. And I find it egregious, utterly evil, that our government is putting a price on this, that it's raising the price of this. The goal, if our goal is to protect people from environmental catastrophe, it should be to open up the market. It should be to remove obstacles and allow people cheap, abundant energy. And instead, they make everything more expensive. And that's not going to affect the rich, folks. That's going to affect the poor and marginalized, the very people the left claims that they want to protect. But then we got into government debt. We got into monetary policy, you know, inflation, bubbles, the Austrian business cycle, pensions, you know, which are essentially predicated on new people coming in and donating or contributing, not donating, contributing under armed threat to this scheme. And, you know, it was Candace Malcolm, who wrote the book Generation Screwed, talked about how initial contributors to old age security in Canada could expect to get 17 times back their contribution, which is a huge return on their investment. But now we're at the point where millennials, if all things stay status quo, if there's no business cycle, if there's no monetary bubble collapse, if the economy keeps growing at its current rate, they can expect to get back 2/3 of their contributions. Now, this is one of the reasons why we're starting to see pension reforms across the world, including Canada, where they're trying to raise the age of pension and all that, because it's predicated on a faulty assumption, right? And our young people, and millennials, by the way, are considered the entitled generation, aren't they? I find that horrifying, to label these kids who are saddled with all this debt and obligation to be considered entitled. That is utterly ridiculous. I talked about the minimum wage. You know, I have 4 teenage kids, and we have a government in Alberta trying to raise the minimum wage. Actually, I believe they just did, to $15 an hour. They recently had Catherine Wynne come in from Ontario into the legislature, to a tremendous round of applause, because she is looked at as the ideal of how we want to run government collaboratively, protecting people and the environment, and looking after the least of these. Well, my kids need to find work. I mean, they got university to pay for. Being political party leader doesn't exactly pay a ton of money. In fact, it costs a lot of money, to be quite honest. And so they're going to have to now fund their way through college. I'm not going to be able to contribute as much as I'd like to their education, and they are having one avenue of that removed from them, and the ability to work. So now they're going to have to take on student loans, cheap student loans, mind you, but they get to contribute by getting these cheap student loans to the rising cost of education, which is another way the young people get screwed. We talked about business regulation. We talked about the war on drugs. You know, as a paramedic, I'm constantly seeing overdoses on fentanyl. I've seen a lot of people die in the last couple of years on fentanyl. This is a direct relation to the war on drugs. These people are getting defrauded by criminals. They're getting pills that they think are OxyContin or Percocets, but they're actually fentanyl. And one pill, they won't feel a buzz at all, and the next pill will kill them dead. And that just doesn't happen when you go to your Joe liquor store owner, right? I mean, they can't put arsenic, have arsenic-laced products anymore that kill you because we repealed prohibition. And so, you know, these kids could go to a party and be offered a quick high. Hey, try this. As children, we're not exactly, you know, teenagers don't always exercise the best judgment, and exercising poor judgment in a moment shouldn't kill you. And that's what we're up against. And of course, you know, freedom of speech is under assault everywhere as well. But there's more than just these economic and initiatory force factors that screw the next generation. And the next thing that I want to talk a little bit about that builds up the case for pessimism has to do with cultural factors. We have the rise now of the alt-right, and like the neocons that have come before them, they are correctly, in my opinion, identifying a problem. They see cultural problems going on in North America and Western civilization, just like the neocons saw the rise of jihadism and terrorism. And just like the neocons, they have exactly the wrong solution to deal with that problem. They have the exact solution that is going to add fuel to that fire. And that's all because of these cultural forces that are at play. So the first thing is the victim narrative. The victim narrative, we constantly tell people that they are victims of oppression. I saw it all the time in Fort McMurray. The oil sands companies are oppressing you, they're killing you. It's a genocide, Neil Young said when he went to DC, that we're killing people. Yet if you look at the First Nations communities around the oil sands and compare them to other First Nations communities, you will see tremendous flourishing, relatively speaking. If you go to other First Nations areas, you see a lot of pain and suffering and squalor because of socialism that's inflicted on these people, where they are denied property rights. But there is this victim narrative foisted on them, and so now, in order to survive, to get paid, to do whatever, you have to play the victim and reinforce that narrative. Wage gap is another thing that we're constantly told, right? Women are told when you enter the workforce, you're going to be oppressed, that you only get 72% of what a man makes. And of course, Walter Block, debunks that very well, I think, and he talks about the marriage asymmetry proposition or theory of why men and women make different wages. And it turns out women, when they get married to a man, make different priorities than the man makes. Mm-hmm. And if you look at a cohort of married women and married men, you will see that married men make far more than married women. But if you look at a cohort of never married women and never married men, it turns out that they make about the same. There is the wage gap almost disappears. And why is that? Well, it's because when you get married, things change. And in fact, married men have it even better than never married men, because they are, turns out, more productive. They actually make more money in the workforce. So they gain exponential, they gain all sorts of benefits from being married. And I can tell you that for a fact. I'm out here doing what I love doing while my wife is at home right now, packing up our entire house because we have to move at the end of the month to a new town. And so, God bless her, she's doing that. I'm not doing that, which allows me to get out and hunt and be productive and do the things that I find meaningful. And so, there might be a disagreement sometimes about whether this is the most meaningful thing I could be doing compared to maybe going out and earning a living. But, we work that out. So, another victim narrative that I see all the time, and it's so insidious. I mean, it really pervades every part of our culture. I'll even talk a little bit about, from my perspective in my field as an emergency services worker, we're constantly told now about PTSD and how to protect ourselves from it and be careful. It's a disease and it's a disorder and all these things. And I predicted a while ago that we're going to see a rise in PTSD. Is it because emergency workers are experiencing more trauma and more egregious things on calls? No, it's because we're told that we are victims of circumstance, that we are powerless against this thing. And I'll tell you a little story. When I started as a paramedic, I had 3 kids die in the back of my ambulance in the period of a month. This was very traumatizing to me. I was a new father. I saw those kids as my own kids. I had nightmares. I couldn't talk to my wife. It was causing marital strain. It was a bad deal. So, and I went to one therapy session, and the therapist asked me one question, and my PTSD went away. What did he ask? He said, "Did you provide any value on that call?" And that stopped me for a sec, because here I was moping. Poor me, I'm completely powerless in the face of death. I got all this training as a paramedic. I'm supposed to be able to shake my fist at death and say, "Not this time, death." And I was unable to do that. I wasn't doing my job. I wasn't getting the barbecue that they promised me for being a hero, for saving a life. But when he asked me that question, did you provide any value, despite the fact that those kids died? You didn't have any control over that, over whether those kids died, but did you control anything else? Did you provide any value? I got hugs from the family afterwards from 2 of those calls. Why did they give me a hug? Because they thought I provided value. And when I realized that, now the symptoms went away, and I have what I describe as post-traumatic growth. In other words, I've experienced all sorts of traumatic situations. I've had to tell loved ones that they've died. I've almost died myself in fires. I've seen horrendous, gory things. And I feel like I'm a better person now because I've been in those situations. Now, wouldn't it be something if we could promote post-traumatic growth as an idea rather than the idea that everyone is victims? I was talking with a young man earlier about his anxiety about stepping forward maybe to be a candidate. And we have this idea that we need to be protected from fear, from anxiety, from danger. And I have found that embracing our anxiety, using it, stepping to the edge of our comfort zone has always been the area of the most opportunity and growth. And I mean, that's how I ended up party leader. I had no ambition or desire to do this, but I just decided I was going to do things that are meaningful to me, and I was going to step outside my comfort zone. And things came together, and I ended up somehow leading a federal party after writing an article not months earlier about how political action is probably immoral. I changed my mind. So how did that happen? The other thing that I see happen constantly, you know, comes out of the public school system, and I mean, we're really up against it, dealing with the propaganda that goes through there, aren't we? I mean, government is not portrayed as it is, it's not even seen as a necessary evil in public school. It's seen as a good, right? It's a committee of virtue. If you want to solve any problem, you get together, you solve it with government. Meanwhile, they pathologize all sorts of behavior, like ADHD. Kids not sitting still in his desk, what do? They give him the drug that is illegal. Adderall is chemically identical, almost chemically identical to meth. And they give that to the kids to help them focus. And yet, so there's all these cultural factors playing into what's going on in society. And I see society becoming more divisive because of it. We're driving a wedge between people, between groups of people. And so there it is. There's my case for pessimism. But we're winning. We are winning, folks. There's evidence of this. This is the case for optimism. Just last week, a member, the leading candidate for leadership of the CPC, adopted our tax platform almost verbatim. Over the past 2 years, we have seen the rise of libertarian culture in the media. So we have seen, for example, the leader of the Wild Rose Party in Alberta, Brian Jean, describe himself in his first press release when he became leader as a libertarian. Justin Trudeau in mainstream media was called a civil libertarian. Stephen Harper was described as a libertarian. And that's because libertarianism is becoming a cool brand. It's becoming something that people are looking at as a new trendy thing. And we're at a crossroads here. We have to be careful, because if Justin Trudeau is a libertarian, well, I'm a monkey's uncle. But this is the first step. We have to explain to people and stay principled and explain, okay, they're not libertarian. They do some things that might seem libertarianish, but here's what it really is. But it's opening up those conversations. And so what is a win? What is a win to a libertarian activist? Well, I would argue it's a freer society. It's less government. That's the ultimate metric of success to me, freer government. And it's because I have kids. I have kids, and I worry about their future, and I worry about the future of their kids eventually in this country as we see all these divisive forces. And so in order to get that win, we need to shift culture. We need to get these ideas out there, right? People are going to vote libertarian when they are libertarian. They're not likely to vote for libertarians until that point. And so we really need the culture to adopt and embrace these ideas. And we're seeing signs of that. And some research shows that All we need is a 10% tipping point. When 10% of a given population adopts an unshakable belief, whether it's abolitionism, whether it's civil rights, whether it's women's suffrage, then the majority of the population adopts that belief system. So we don't need to convince 50% of the population to adopt this. We need to get 10% of people with an unshakable belief system. We are doing that. We are winning that. And the reason we're doing it is because we have courage. We're entering into the fray, and we're not afraid to stand on principle, even though our voice is shaking and our knees are knocking. Is any other politician willing to do that? I see them all as timid people. They are afraid. Even libertarians in mainstream movements, have to adopt a pragmatic approach, right? Where they don't reveal that they're a libertarian. They try to appease special interest groups. If you want to get and maintain a seat in power, that's what you kind of have to do. And so what we have to do is shift the market demand from big government, from special interests, from all these things people want. We need the culture to demand a smaller government. And look at Gary Johnson's numbers, 10%, 20% in some areas. He's probably going to get at least 5% of the vote, and that's huge. We're halfway to that tipping point, if that's an accurate metric. And so that's real reason for optimism. What are we doing to win? What is it that we are doing that has been successful? Well, we had a lot of success in the last general election. We also had a lot of things that we learned from. We could have done twice or 3 times as good as we did. We learned some hard lessons in that election. I did personally. I did some things wrong. I did some things right. But what we did right, we can build on. And what we did right, I believe, is speak to people in a language that they can understand. Quite often, we talk about something like the drug war. And as libertarians, we say, well, who has the right to say what I put in my body? And that's very appealing to a person who's got a libertarian brain. But that doesn't sit well with a conservative or a liberal. Conservative wants an orderly society. They're concerned about order versus barbarism. And so to them, we have to explain, I share your concerns. I don't want to see more drug addiction. I don't want to see that kind of world. Andrew Lawton on his radio show asked me yesterday, he said, you guys are, something about, that meme that put me on the map, which was, I want gay married couples to be able to protect their marijuana plants with guns. A lot of people see us as pot-smoking guys armed to the teeth, making out with all, the same sex and all this kind of thing. That scares the crap out of social conservatives. And, I made the case to Andrew. I said, listen, that's not the society I want. I don't want that. I don't want to see that. But I want a society where government isn't trying to control culture or impose culture, which is what the alt-right wants, which is what SJWs want, which is what social conservatives in the past have wanted. But they're starting to shift now. There's a market opportunity to appeal to these. Because I told Andrew, I said, listen, I believe that when we adopt libertarian principles, social conservatism is the natural emerging kind of culture that comes out of that. Because now you're relying on community, on each other for support. You're relying on institutions like the church and charity groups. And that binds a community tighter together, and it gets rid of this idea that we need immediate gratification. Suddenly, now, when we get rid of this cheap incentive to consume that starts at the central banking level and works its way down through culture, suddenly long-term investments and putting in time become, and all these social conservative values emerge. So we can talk about that stuff and we can get support. Social conservatives understand this. And when we're talking to the left about these issues, they're concerned about oppressed classes and the oppression, oppressors versus the oppressed, right? And we have a strong message there. We can talk in their language and explain to them how government makes everything worse, how climate action is actually making the environment and the climate worse for human flourishing. It's not making it better for human flourishing. Climate-related deaths are down over 90% because of fossil fuels. And so that message needs to get out. In fact, I'm writing an article right now that's called "When is Climate Action Ethical?" So I want to flip the question on its head and say and start with the assumption that climate action is unethical on the face of it. Under what circumstances could you point a gun at me and tell me I have a right to climate stasis, therefore you don't have a right to exhale? And I think that's a very difficult case to make. The other thing, the last thing I'll leave you with, as time's getting short, is the other reason for optimism is this. I did a talk recently with Walter Block, and he said back in the early days when he was adopting the libertarian philosophy and hanging out with, you know, Ayn Rand and Murray Rothbard and all these people, he asked Murray Rothbard, how many libertarians are there in the world, Murray? And Murray's like, 1, 2, 3, 25. And look at how many people we have in the room today alone. This warmed my heart to come in and see all these people. I was half expecting to see maybe half a dozen to a dozen people, but this is a full room. We had to put in extra chairs. This is a growing movement, and there are probably closer to 5 million or 10 million libertarians in the world now. This is not going away. Once you become an abolitionist, you do not go back to advocating for the plantation and talking about how the plantation ought to be managed. Once we are a moral movement, we're an ethical movement, and we're cutting new ground. We're the pioneers here. It's uncomfortable. It's difficult work. It's hard work, but it's also enjoyable work. And so I'm happy that we're able to work together with the OLP. The BC Libertarian Party now has a new leader, Clayton Wellwood, a young man, very presentable and well-spoken. They haven't had a leader in I don't know how long. And so now they are going to be making roads because now they have a public-facing figure that can talk about these ideas to the public in BC. All these synergies are coming together. This is exponential growth. We're getting close to the tipping point. And so that's it, folks. That's my reason for optimism. Thanks.